Welcome to the second week of Lent, where Jesus is going to take Peter, James, and John up the mountain to reveal his transfiguration, to reveal his glory, and to teach us something very important about the reality not only of who he is, but the reality of suffering. Jesus takes them up the mountain and eventually reminds them that they have to go down the mountain, where he will experience his passion, death, and his resurrection. The second week is a week where we are going to learn more about not only the reality of suffering, but more importantly, where is God with us in the midst of the suffering. Suffering is it's a part of life. Every one of us experiences suffering, and sometimes the suffering that we experience is because of the external circumstances around us. I'm from South Louisiana, and hurricanes are just a part of life. I remember distinctly in August of 2005 being at my mom and dad's house with them in preparation for Hurricane Katrina. As the storm passed, we certainly did the best we could to help my mom and dad and everything that they were facing. But I remember distinctly watching the news on Tuesday night when the levees broke in New Orleans. I remember I can still see the images of families on the top of the roofs of their homes trapped with the floodwaters, and this Coast Guard heroically rescuing them, and that's what we all saw on TV. What we didn't see on TV is that the closest shelter to New Orleans at that time was in Terrebonne Parish, where I grew up, in a little town called Houma, where mom and dad were. I remember walking in to that shelter on the last Wednesday in August and found 3,000 people who were suffering. And I remember walking out in December with a whole lot of lessons learned about the reality of suffering. I remember people, I can see their faces and can still hear their voices within my heart. Moms who had to put their own children on a different bus that went to Houston. Fathers who were separated from their families and didn't know where they were. I remember listening to the questions of why. What are we going to do next? I remember a whole lot of tears and a whole lot of hurt. I remember a whole lot of suffering. And when I look back on that time of Hurricane Katrina, one of the things that is seared within my heart is the reality that God is always with us in the midst of the suffering. I think there's a lie whispered in a lot of our hearts when it comes to suffering about why it's happening, but specifically there's a lie that's whispered in a lot of our hearts that we're alone. And I think one of the reasons why we resist suffering is because we fear that we are alone. You know, sometimes the suffering is because of the external circumstances in life, but sometimes the suffering is because of what's in our hearts. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I struggle with sin just like you struggle with sin. There are patterns in my life which make me feel like St. Paul when he says, I don't know why I do what I do. I try to give my life to Jesus Christ every day, just like a lot of you do. And yet I still struggle with sin. I still grasp at things that I know are not going to come through on what they promise. I still struggle with compulsively acting out of my own emotions rather than relating them to God. There are places in my heart where that transfigured glory of Jesus Christ is still trying to shine, but sometimes I just resist God. You ever do that in your own life? It's almost like sometimes God wants to get so close to us sometimes that we push him away, either because we're afraid of what he's going to see or feel, or maybe if there's a whisper in my head sometimes that if God really knew what was in my heart, then he would abandon me or he would leave too. You see, sometimes the suffering is because of what's inside our hearts. And there's something about this second week of Lent and the journey of Lent for all of us where Jesus is trying to offer us encouragement that we're not alone. Listen to me. You've never been alone. No matter whether suffering has been because of the external things or if the suffering is because of your own sin, and no matter if you haven't heard him or felt him, you have never been alone. As his face is transfigured before the apostles, it is his power and his glory that gives us the courage that we need to face our own suffering. The second week of Lent is an important week for us. It's personal, and there's good news. You're not alone. You never have been. And you don't have to be afraid to face suffering. It would be great if we could stay on the top of the mountain. But Jesus wants to reveal his glory at the bottom of the mountain, where it's difficult, where we might suffer. And he's going to remind us over and over that he's always with us and we're never alone. God bless you.